Hello, everybody. How are you today? Welcome to the CertiCraft. We are on episode 28 today, and today is the Direct Delivery Rebellion, and we'll get more into what that is all about in a bit here. Want to introduce myself and this series, and do a land acknowledgement, and then I'll introduce our guests and today's topics. So the CertiCraft is hosted by CertiCraft. I'm the CEO of CertiCraft. CertiCraft's on a mission to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive within the regulated market. And the reason we're doing this episode today is because we think that the government policies that are being implemented right now are not helping people thrive, and we want to change that. The CertiCraft is a series to discuss the state of the legal craft cannabis industry. We bring guests that we are really excited about and respect in this world of cannabis, and just have open-ended discussions with them. I live in Nelson, BC. It's the unceded territories of the Sinaiaks people, and through intermarriage, the Tanaha. And it's a pretty fucked up history, as there used to be thousands of Sinaiaks people here in this area. Now there's less than 10, and most of those people aren't here anymore because they've been murdered by settlers here in this area. And there's a lot of really gross history in different pockets of Canada, and I encourage that each of you, wherever you are, to at the very least understand the story and the history of the first people in your area. I think that's a critical first step to any kind of meaningful reconciliations, is to actually understand the history of the land that you're on. So on that depressing note, let's I'll do one last bit of housekeeping, and then I'll introduce our guests here today. We do have a chat function here. Please interact with us, say hi. It's always a lot more fun when we actually have engagement. This is going to be a collaborative discussion. We're really brainstorming here what we can do to ensure that the BCLDB actually cares and actually does a good job that ensures that small-scale producers can thrive. If you have suggestions, share them. We want to hear your thoughts as well. If you have any questions for our guests, we have a separate dedicated questions tab, and you can upvote questions that you like, and at the end we'll go through questions in order of upvotes. And without any further ado, I would love to introduce to you our three guests here today. In the order that I see them here clockwise, we have Bruce Acton, Kelly Coulter, and Jaclynn Pahota. I don't know how to pronounce your last name. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay, she says yes. I'll ask each of you to maybe share 30 to 60 seconds about yourself, and specifically your history in the world of policy advocacy and trying to get government to change things in a matter that matters to you. And I'll go in reverse clockwise order here. So Jaclynn, we'll start with you.
Thanks, Sami. So I am from Vancouver, so I am coming to you guys from the traditional and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. Tsleil-Waututh people. I'm sorry, that pronunciation is terrible. Apologies to all the Tsleil-Waututh people. So my name is Jaclynn. I'm the executive director at the Association of Canadian Cannabis Retailers, which is actually in the process of relaunching and rebranding to the Retail Cannabis Council of British Columbia, a little bit more reflective of our membership. So we represent 52 cannabis brands, legal retailers in BC. So approximately like 113 stores. And my journey here, you started in the medical space. I started as a medical advocate. I had cancer touched my life personally, and cannabis was, part of, my loved one's journey through that unfortunate scenario. And then, I started working as a regulatory consultant, so working with people looking to join the legal system as cultivators and processors and retailers as well. And then, my interest in land use actually was what spurred me to start working with government relations, because I looking around the landscape in BC, I saw that there was going to be a real challenge for finding places for us to be cannabis businesses. And then I started working with the association to, change the minds of municipal governments across the province. And that has snowballed into provincial advocacy and some federal advocacy as well.
Awesome, Jaclynn. Thank you. Kelly, what about yourself? What's your background?
Oh, hi. I was thinking Bruce was next, so I was just kind of like relaxing for a minute. Let me get my thinking cap on. I started in advocacy in Ontario, mostly in the Ottawa area when the crime bill was happening with Stephen Harper under the Conservative government. 6 plants would get you 6 months under the mandatory minimums, and that to me was pretty alarming. And so I became involved with Normal Canada at that time. Of
And for
course,
those of us that aren't familiar with NORML, can you tell us quickly what NORML is?
Normal is an acronym for National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws. It's an international organization, and it's been very effective here in Canada and in the United States, mostly. After the crime bill, after we were very successful in that campaign, fast forward to Justin Trudeau, we started lobbying very aggressively for legalization. Again, successful there. Since that time, we've been back to, when I say we, it's kind of the royal we, but I partner with other people. Obviously, we advocated for the allowance of outdoor cultivation. We were successful there. I'm currently an advisor with the Craft Cannabis Association of BC. We focus primarily on small independent cultivators and processors. And we've been working and going back to what Jaclynn was saying earlier about the municipalities. That was our number one concern. So we've been working with municipalities. We have an event every year with the UBCM. And this one will be coming up in September in Whistler. We can talk about that more later, but the municipalities are critical, obviously, with regards to land use, and that's one of our biggest focuses. But we do work provincially and federally as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Kelly. Stoked to have you here. And for those of you who don't know this about Kelly, she seems to be the person who personally convinced Justin Trudeau to actually make legalization a big part of his platform when he first ran for prime minister. And you can
and
read
the
about
Liberal
that on
Party of Canada.
Yeah. So thank you on behalf of the legal industry for convincing him to make that happen. Bruce, you are the anomaly here in that you are not involved in the cannabis sector, but you've done a lot of policy advocacy work on various levels of government. So I'm really curious to hear what you have to say about yourself in relation to your history with policy advocacy.
Okay, so in some ways, I'm not really a policy advocate. Not the way the other two guests are. First of all, I come from a management consulting background, and I started off with the big international firms and then set up my own firm and consulted for 30 plus years in the industry, advising all 3 levels of government around effectively internal advocacy. So when the government ministries want to get something done, whether it's like a change in policy or things like that, there's usually a business plan that needs to be written. And so my firm, Edmonton-based, though I'm here in Vernon now, did in excess of $1.2 billion worth of internal business submissions. We had an extraordinarily high success rate because we actually aligned with where the government wanted to go. And I think that's what, maybe that's what I can contribute to you guys today, is figure out how do you align and pitch to the government in their language so that you get what you want out, and show goal alignment between the two areas, because there clearly is. There's a lot of goal alignment between what you guys want and what the government wants. It's just a matter of getting it done.
Awesome. So with these introductions here out of the way, thank you, Kelly, Bruce, and Jaclynn for being here and sharing a bit of your histories. I want to kind of just touch briefly on kind of the challenges that ourselves at CertiCraft, and that more or less every single other company and organization in the legal craft cannabis industry in BC that I've talked to anyway, seem to agree on as being really major challenges in terms of how the BC LDB is going about implementing direct delivery. I just want to kind of briefly talk about that. See, Jaclynn, you're the other person here who's most involved kind of with this world. See if you have anything else you want to add to that, and then really focus the rest of this discussion on how we can get them to do a better job. Our goal is not to slander the BC LDB here. You know, we're not in their shoes. We don't understand what they're going through, but there are real problems in terms of how things have been going on, and it's problems that are like a little hard to define in a very technical and specific way, because it's really more like the vibe or like their attitude, which is not something you can really like point to in a very, very clear way on some level. And I'll kind of share my perspective here, which is that the biggest challenge is they just don't seem to care. They don't seem to care about the fact that businesses are closing down. They don't seem to care about the fact that people are struggling as a result of the current distribution. And they don't seem to care about the fact that if they don't engage, just that's kind of like just what it feels like. And I know that like talking in terms of emotions and feelings is not the clearest. Like the way that the direct delivery program came to be was the Cannabis Secretariat's office saw that the BC economy and the cannabis sector was struggling. There was a lot of challenges. People, small-scale farmers throughout BC who comprise the industry here, who have created a globally renowned BC Bud brand, they have been struggling, and most have chosen not to transition because of seeing those who have tried to transition, all the struggles they were going through. And so BC, the province, recognized, hey, there's two programs we think we can implement that would make a big difference. Farmgate, direct delivery. Distribution's been the biggest issue. It's been the biggest bottleneck. It is stopping this sector from thriving. So let's do two different new approaches to distribution. Let's bring that to the table. The LCRB received Farmgate. They have been great in terms of actually engaging the industry and really trying to listen. The BCLDB has kind of had the opposite approach. They've had this approach of, we know what's best. We've done distribution for who knows how many decades. I actually don't know when the BCLDB got the mandate to start doing distribution for BC. I think it was late 70s or the 80s sometime. That's kind of what's coming to mind right now, but I'm not 100% sure. And that attitude to me is pretty odd, because if they had done a good job with distribution for the cannabis sector, the province of BC wouldn't be telling them, hey, you need a different new distribution program. And so to me, it's clear if you did it once without meaningfully engaging the small scale cannabis industry, now you're creating something for that industry, you have to meaningfully engage them. And they have chosen not to. And when I say they, I don't know if it's I doubt it's the entire organization. It's probably like people right at the top that are making these kinds of high level decisions. From what I hear, a lot of people who work at the BCLDB that interact with the industry, they're great. They understand the needs. They understand how to work people. They try really hard, but apparently they don't have much sway as things go higher up. And I can't really speak to that because I'm not part of that organization. But the fact of the matter is, from my perspective as the CEO of CertiCraft, they don't seem to care enough to actually try to make a good job of this program. They're unwilling to test out the many assumptions that they're making, and it's alarming because people are closing down shop. People are losing their houses. People have put so much on the line to get licensed, and they're being screwed over because of distribution. And this potential that can solve all these problems, the organization behind it just doesn't seem to actually care, and that's kind of the crux of it. There's another piece in there around there being this dual mandate situation within the BCLDB, where they are both a public serving organization and at the same time a for-profit corporation. And there's very clear conflicts of interest there. How much that comes to play or not, I can't really speak to, but I'll maybe turn the table over to Jaclynn here, because she has had a lot of other engagements with direct delivery and the BCLDB, and I'd rather her be able to share her perspective as well, and not just me.
I'll jump in for sure, Sami. So a couple of things. Acres was really focused on direct supply from the retail perspective, because we identified back in 2019 that one of the struggles that my retailers were having was differentiating themselves in market, right? So like, how do we can't compete on price. So how do we offer the public a reason to come into our stores as opposed to the store that's down the street? So, you know, I come from the unregulated space. I come from medical advocacy, and, you know, there was a lot of diversity in market in the unregulated space that meant that, you know, competition was about, you know, variety and about rarity. And, you know, there were instances where high price points were a feature and not a bug. So we were hoping to kind of recreate something like that for the legal framework. So when we made the first recommendation related to direct supply to the Cannabis Secretariat, that was kind of what we had in mind, with a trickle down effect of, you know, the fact that we would have a direct, you know, reach into the micro cultivators, so that people who were making purchasing decisions would be people who knew what the public were asking for, as opposed to a central distributor. So that was kind of our vision for this program. And I feel that perhaps, you know, the sense that the LDB does not care, I think is a very strong sense amongst many people in the sector. But I think it is important to remember that the distribution branch, you know, from their perspective, they are mandated to be profitable. You know what I mean? Like, that is their mandate as a branch of, you know, of the government. And they are not, you know, technically a crown corporation, they're a legislated monopoly, you know, but they do have a mandate to be profitable. So they're not really, their function isn't really to care about the health of the sector as much as it is to ensure that their, you know, apparatus is, you know, cash flowing for the province and the people of BC, which is really unfortunate, because I think that in the long run, if we had a longer kind of vision of this sector, we would end up being much more profitable if we were, you know, effectively enabling the market to be a thriving and vibrant market. So I think that it's important for us to frame our kind of exploration of this subject with the understanding that the people who currently have this policy, like, you know, and they're crafting the policy, are not really, they're not really interested in the same kind of outcomes that we are, per se. Do you know what I mean? And I think that that's been kind of obvious based on the way that the policy analysts at the LDB have chosen to interact with the sector, like that feeling of not being particularly collaborative or interested in, you know, the viability of this program. And that is, to me, the concern. And I don't want to monopolize, but I will say that I think that, you know, the 15% wholesale markup is, rather the direct supply market that's being proposed, is a symptom of a lot of other things that are underlying the cannabis market. Like that, the fact that it is going to make or break businesses is a symptom of something that is deeply wrong with the sector in BC right now. And I think that, like, that is something that we need to, in addition to, you know, asking for direct things like, you know, a reduction in this wholesale markup, really point out to our elected officials. Do you see what I mean? That this is a scenario wherein, you know, the sector is really struggling, and there are a lot of different reasons for that, and most of them are unnecessary. Do you see what I mean? And I don't think the distribution branches are really the people to help us with that, because it's not really in their purview to do so. Right. My hope was that the Secretariat would take a lot more of a direct hand in the direct supply program. We posited a pilot. We said, before you roll this out, you know, take a group of licensed retailers and a group of micro license holders and pilot the program to see where the, you know, the foibles are, where this is going to fall down, if the economies of scale related to logistics are going to make this viable. Because I think that we have to ask ourselves, what's the point of direct supply? The point of direct supply, I assume, is to somehow materially advantage small cultivators in British Columbia. And if that is the purpose of this policy, then it's a failure. We're not going to do that, right? We're not going to meaningfully advantage our small retailers. In fact, this program has the potential to advantage our retailers more than our cultivators, because, you know, we get the benefit of, you know, potentially a lot of, you know, in-market variety, et cetera. But I mean, you know, that's only one half of the equation, right? We want the entire sector to thrive, because they can through a system like direct delivery. So that's what I will say about that.
So Kelly and Bruce, Kelly, you're pretty involved in the cannabis sector, not necessarily in this piece of it. Bruce, you're not involved in the cannabis sector, but me and you've had conversations. You are somewhat aware over the past few months of some of the challenges that we've had here in this industry. Having heard what Jaclynn and I have had to say so far, do you have any first impressions or thoughts that you want to bring and share with our audience and with ourselves here?
Sure.
Go ahead, Bruce.
Okay. So, first of all, if I put on my pure consulting hat and I've gone through the financials and the mandate letters from the government, basically, you guys are kind of a pain in the butt. You're a tiny little business that if you went away, if I was running the distribution board, my life would be a lot easier. You guys have dropped the overall gross margins of the distribution branch, and you've increased my costs. Like if I was putting on, like if I was Mr. Blaine Lawson, who's the CEO, you guys are only a few percentage points. I'm running a $4 billion business, and you guys are about $137 million worth of, so you're a few percentage points, right? Now, you're not alone in complaining that the things need to be changed, because the other side of the house, the 97% of the house, recently went through and got what's called a BTAP, a Business Technical Advisory Panel. So, I mean, clearly, they need some input. And so the good thing from you guys is there's a learning experience here. The Business Technical Advisory Panel has put together, and now this is on the liquor side, has put together a whole set of recommendations. And the beauty of it is the minister has charged them, the CEO, with actually tracking the implementation of those recommendations. So you're sharing a common problem with other suppliers. So what you're struggling with isn't new. So, and in a way, that's good. It's just that you're so small, right? So I think there's some opportunities for you here to look at the model that's worked on the liquor side and simply just try to replicate that into your side of the business.
So Bruce, when you say try to replicate what the liquor side is doing, are you specifically talking about that BTAP thing that you just brought up?
Yeah, that would be a good start, because if you had a standing committee that is advising them, that would basically go through and look at some of the issues on distribution and things like that, then I think a lot of it would become a standard mechanism for input from the industry into the distribution system.
So how do you ensure that they listen? Because that's kind of been the challenge of different advocacy organizations in BC, including advocacy organizations working together in tandem, just being ignored. And so how do you, if we were to create this equivalent, how do you make it so that they actually meaningfully engage?
Okay, so the one thing that the liquor guys did was their lobby had basically made this a high-profile public document. And so they had good industry advocacy on it, good participants, and they produced a formal report, which then worked its way through the government mechanism to become part of what they call mandate level letters. Every minister in the government has a mandate letter, which that's kind of their scorecard, right? And in this case, like Jaclynn has pointed out, the distribution board's in a weird situation. If it was a crown corporation, all the money it's made, it could reinvest and it have a lot more flexibility. But as a board, it's just part of a ministry. So it can increase revenue, but it doesn't get to control its spending the same way a crown corp does. So what you basically have to do is influence the ministry policy. And so that could be as simple as, like if you can get one of these advisory panels up and running to build the business case aligned with the ministry goals. Because really, as much as you guys say that there's a difference in their goals, I don't think there is, right? There's going to be some short-term pain because you are a new business to them. But if you can show that there's an increased revenue opportunity by having more people in the shop, right? Like bringing in more legal cultivators and increasing the total revenue. If the gross margin goes down, who cares? As long as the total dollars thrown off, right? Because you got to look at this. This is a big money machine for the province, right? And so if you can align your goals to show that you could make more money for the government, I think everybody would be happy.
And that's the same argument we use with the Department of Finance Canada to get cannabis on the budget for the very first time. Actually, at your recommendation, Bruce was instrumental in the letter that we wrote in tandem with the Kootenay Cannabis Council. We've renamed to the Kootenay Cannabis Council recently, that we got over 50 submissions on to that budget, and they've created a standing table now within the federal budget for 2022 to interact with the industry. And I think if we didn't have that argument of lower the excise, you'll actually end up with much more money in the long run. But I don't think we would have gotten through without that. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Kelly, we haven't heard from you yet since we started kind of talking about this. What are your first impressions, having heard what everybody's said so far?
Well, I have to say, I'm listening to Bruce and I'm looking at my notes and I'm like, is he reading my mind right now? What's going on here? The first thing that I want to say is that in government and government relations, your goal is to either show the people that you're talking to how you're going to get them elected or reelected. And then the second thing is, especially with the ministries, such as the Ministry of Finance, who oversees the BCLDB, is to show them the money. So the business case is imperative. You have to show them the business case. And with regards to strategy, and he mentioned the word high profile, the technical advisory panel, we at Craft Cannabis, we're very grassroots. We rely a lot on our community for their input, and then we are, basically talking to the secretariat or who have, various levels of government. But I believe from a grassroots point of view, the ministry needs to hear from the people that are currently in the industry. And I'm old-fashioned, I'm old school. Handwritten letter to your local government officials is the most effective way to get their ear. The work that we do with the municipalities and our one event at the UBCM, we saw 5 years ago when we first started doing it that the municipalities were going to be critical. And I cannot stress that enough. And they're accessible as well. You can go and speak to your local city council people. You can write a letter to your MLAs, your MPs, your ministers. So there's other avenues rather than just trying to get the ear of the LDB, who, by all accounts, are not listening. There's varying opinions on that. But if I was a small cultivator, retailer, processor, I'd be putting pen to paper, and I would be, having coffee with my local government and, doing those small things, and also supporting the people that are actively lobbying, such as a technical advisory panel that Bruce was talking about, participate.
Kelly, I've got a quick question for you. So it really makes sense to me how writing to the Ministry of Finance and how writing to your MLA can potentially influence this. how does writing to your local government, your city council or your regional district or whatever, how does that have the potential to influence something happening on the provincial level like this?
Because you're showing them the money and you're showing them how it impacts their local communities. And I know, for instance, in Nelson, where you are, I mean, that community is very intertwined with the cannabis economy, and everybody knows it. You know, everybody knows that. I mean, how many restaurants are there in Nelson? It's like unbelievable, right? Like 90 restaurants in a population of what, like 4,000? I don't know. It's crazy, right? But
they're all amazing.
And then they are all amazing. And so it's also finding your allies, right? Like finding those restaurant owners. Our theme this year at the UBCM will be tourism. I mean, we try and stay a little bit ahead of the curve. And we will be having people there from other industries representing and speaking to, you know, how it impacts their businesses, right? Tours, you know, cannabis tours, lodging, the restaurant industry, all of these industries, it's all intertwined. And if you can
Kelly,
make that business, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, Kelly, that would be key. Like if you were hiring me as a consultant, if I was still working, I would be driving the tourism business, and I'd be going and looking at the cases in Colorado and the other jurisdictions that have opened up the tourism business, the cannabis culture tourism business, because the spinoff is huge, right?
Huge.
And so you'd be looking at now effectively a multi-sector approach, right? Because the spinoff is, you know, heads and beds, right? There's the restaurants.
Never heard that.
Yeah, well, it's the analogy of bums and seats, right? That's the airlines. It's heads and beds for hotels and B&Bs, right? You got your restaurant spinoffs. So there's a huge business case. So if you look at the alignment on what the ministry wants to do, and, you know, let's face it, it's like this part of the ministry is a cash generator. There's a huge potential. So there's, I think, Kelly, you've got the right approach. Let's get our allies, who are much bigger than us, quite truthfully, at the table supporting it, because there's an impact there. So, you know, aside from the tourism industry, there's also just the overall business community. Like there's a big lobby group for the British Columbia business industry, right? That would probably step up to the table to join and would want a representative on a technical advisory panel, because it's just good for the economy, right? Because our economy still tends to be really resource driven, or at minimal, like one step away from resource, right? So,
and Bruce, sorry, what was the name of that BC-wide business lobby? I'm just taking notes on.
You know, Stanley, I've just gone blank, but it's the BC. Maybe when one of the other people is speaking, I'll go pull them up. But there was a BC. BC. I think it's BC, British Columbia Business Council, and they're a really effective lobby group. And so, you know, bringing them to the table, Tourism British Columbia, all these other interested parties that would actually benefit from the expansion of your industry.
Okay.
Yeah. I think there is an issue, though, and that is money. You know, what costs money and what doesn't cost money. And so we have to be very cognizant of, you know, how we spend our money, right? And how we spend our time. And that's why I suggest some real grassroots stuff. But I support what you're saying, Bruce. I just, you know.
If I can jump in, guys, because I've been living this for the last 3 years in terms of like advocacy. And what I will say is I agree with you. My kind of approach with our retailers has always been a dual approach, so working with the regulator because they have their mandate and what have you to make granular changes that are, going to make our businesses' lives better in the interim, while targeting our elected officials with like big policy asks. And the issue that we've run into is actually, I think that everything that both Bruce and Kelly are saying makes a lot of sense, but that is in a rational kind of world where it's an unfortunate fact of the matter that we don't like, that doesn't seem to apply to this sector in any kind of like meaningful way. Because like I've heard from government time and time again, oh, come with a united voice, come with like ask, come with solutions. We have done that along with organizations like the CUNY Economic Development Council and the BC Craft Farmers Co-op and a number of other organizations, the BC Chamber of Commerce, spoken with one voice, and it has fallen largely on deaf ears. And I think that is I'm going to say this like straight up, due to stigma. And I think that it is really critically important, because when my retailers reach out to their MLAs with very, very granular and specific, like, we're not talking like, oh, I have a laundry list of complaints with no solutions. This is, documents and correspondence that I am crafting for them with our government relations team to send to the MLAs. And the response is, talk to the Solicitor General. It's not my problem. And that is something that is, to me, like baffling from a local MLA's perspective, because I'm a small business owner and you're constituent. This is very deeply, your problem as my representative. And so that kind of like, that's something that we have to like help people in the community get over those hurdles, because when they are doing these, like totally reasonable and like absolutely correct, reaches into government and advocacy, they're doing all the right things. We're still hitting these like crazy roadblocks. And I think that, Bruce, as you had said, like, one of the first entities that showed any support to our sector on the tourism side was actually Tourism Kelowna. We approached tourism boards all over BC, and there was a lot of hesitance to come and say, yeah, this is something we want to embrace. They were concerned that there would be, kind of an optic issue if that was so. And the fine folks at Tourism Kelowna actually welcomed us into the community. We had an amazing conference that we hosted there. We brought 450 people. And actually the Tourism Kelowna folks shared with us something very interesting, which was that the profile of the average cannabis tourist based on other jurisdictions is actually identical to a wine tourist. Super high value, like very committed to their hobby, really, and so these are rational facts of the matter from an objective spot, not from our sector, but rather from the Tourism Kelowna folks.
Just quick question, Jaclyn, is did they have data on that they shared with you that we can reference? Because I think that would be
absolutely
really
I can send out the report if you want to share.
That'd be amazing.
And this is actually something that we're trying to get Tourism Kelowna to really push out to the other tourism branches, so as an ally to our sector, because they have seen that this is a positive thing. They can embrace cannabis as a tourism driver with no negative outcomes, and it's just getting to those opportunities becomes really challenging. So I think that I agree wholeheartedly with Bruce and Kelly that a really concerted approach and like strong group messaging towards all of our elected officials is the way forward. Because to my mind, we need to change the mandate that the government has kind of created around cannabis in BC. We've tried to do this kind of organic transitional situation, and it's left us where we are now. And I think that it's really important for us to encourage, the folks that are making those really high-level ministerial decisions to re-examine what their priorities are at a very fundamental level. And I would love to hear Kelly and Bruce's ideas of how we can be more effective in doing those things, because that I think that's the key there, right?
Well, Jaclyn, you've identified one of the big problems is there's no clear mandate for this, because they sit inside actually the Ministry of Attorney General. Finance wants their slice. So we have different agencies, different ministries at the table. And somehow you need to get that sort of united goal and get the alignment on that. So the typical way that this would be done under different provincial government would be a cross-ministry initiative, right?
Mhm.
But those things are really friggin' hard to get started. But I think you guys have identified, like, if you can start a grassroots campaign where everyone's talking about this on a routine basis, to get it to the point where somebody says, you know, yeah, this is a big business opportunity. And I mean, there's not only do you have the information from Kelowna, but there's tons of information coming out of the United States that's been published as well that you can do, that's third party, it's independent, so that you can show that this is a viable business. It's going to generate a ton of money. And the problem is, actually, what you should be showing is, hey, Colorado's like 3 years, 5 years ahead of us. And if we don't get in, we're going to be lagging in the market, and we're going to lose maybe we might lose local tourism to the United States, right?
Mhm.
So I think I agree with you guys. If you guys can get that grassroots, and if you can get enough interest, and it'd be worthwhile talking to somebody who was on the liquor panel to say, how did you get this going, right? And see if you could get that established and make it a standing committee or a standing panel, as it is right now on the other side, right, of the house. Because you guys have the potential to be to generate a lot more revenue and better profitability. Now, the one thing that I don't think any of you guys have really focused on yet is the illegal part of the market. Because
sorry, Bruce. I got a quick question for you, clarification question on something you already said before you move there. So you mentioned this cross-ministry initiative that happens in provincial governments sometimes, and you alluded to you thinking that that's an important thing for us to try to achieve. Can you confirm, is that like, am I picking up what you're putting down there, that you think it's important to get a cross-ministry initiative going in BC?
It would be lovely if you could get a cross-ministry initiative. And here's why. If you get multiple ministries at the table, then what happens is those performance numbers that get drilled down to the deputy ministers, it would start at the minister. They'll get a minister's mandate letter. Those minister mandate letters get drilled down to the deputy minister, who gets performance measures that they're measured by. So now all of a sudden, instead of one person who's got a performance measure, which actually isn't all that big, because like I said, you guys are only a few percentage points for the distribution branch, right? If all of a sudden now, though, I've got 2 or 3 other ministries who've also got that same darn measure, I've got higher visibility, right? So, I think, it might be that you have, the ideal committee would be, it would have somebody from tourism, it would have someone from finance, as well as, the liquor distribution branch, right? I imagine
agriculture would also make sense in there too.
Yeah.
Agriculture.
Yeah.
The Minister of Agriculture has recused herself, so that's a challenge for us in terms of one of the major players won't come to the table, Bruce. That's very frustrating. I agree. I actually, something that I've thought would be very, very helpful would be a Minister of State for this file. You know what I mean? Something, because it's quite involved, right? It's a green, like, it's not a green field, it's a daylighted opportunity. And it's not really appropriate to expect the Solicitor General's apparatus to have their finger on the pulse of a sector that touches 8 different files, in my opinion. So yeah. To me, Minister of State would be an amazing solution to this, even if it was only temporary, because then we would have a direct minister with oversight and with mindfulness towards cannabis and the health of the sector, as opposed to having it all be mixed up in public safety, public health mandate, all this other considerations that we're currently dealing with. Not that those things aren't critically important, but I think what we're talking about here is the economic health of these businesses that are in the process of.
That's a great point, because I don't know what they call them in BC, but at the federal government, it would be like a parliamentary secretariat, right? So it's not a minister, but it's somebody who sits at cabinet. And like a good example of that was actually Sami, the guy I introduced you to before, Randy Bissonov, who had the LGBTQ plus sector, right? And he sat in cabinet, right? And so you do want that visibility. I mean, if you could get that, that'd be great. But I mean, short term, it might be that you start working some of those issues up like that to create that type of profile. Yeah.
Yeah. If I can just jump in, because having worked starting with the federal government at the very beginning, when legalization was a glimmer, we would go and meet with MPs, and I tell people, it was like being a used car salesman from the wrong side of the tracks, selling a lemon. Like, they did not want to have anything to do with this. And that was not that long ago, right? And so, stigma it changes over time. And I know that a lot of people are really on the line right now. Like, I'm really feeling this, and I think we all are. In order to expedite things, I mean, strategy is so important. I'm really glad that you're putting on this show today, Sami. I think that we need to come up with some good planning moving forward. I appreciate everyone's input today.
I got a quick question for you guys, because we're about 12 minutes away from our scheduled time.
Yeah.
Can any of you guys stick around longer? Because this conversation doesn't seem to want to end soon.
I'll hang out with you guys. This is awesome.
Bruce,
Yeah.
I know, Kelly, you have a hard deadline at noon. Is that correct?
I do. I'm sorry. I do volunteer work on Fridays like a good citizen.
We appreciate
So,
you.
so is the problem you guys are just a whole bunch of dope smoking hippies?
I am not a consumer.
That's what they
Bruce.
think. I'm not either.
$5.5 billion industry. They treat us like we're hilarious. What I will say, guys, so something that I've been thinking about a lot, folks, and I use guys as a gender neutral term because I'm from British Columbia, and that's like how we do here. So folks, I'm trying to break myself up about folks. What I was thinking of as a strategy kind of potential here is coming together. The organizations like myself and BC Craft Farmers Co-op and BC Craft Cannabis and the Economic Development Group, etc. And then we talked about grassroots, and we talked about how we spend our money, because obviously we're extremely we have extremely limited funds for a lot of the people who we're talking about right now. But I believe genuinely that it would be beneficial to our sector to start investing in some third-party polling to demonstrate that the public does care about this issue, because that is something that I've heard time and time again, that there from a political perspective, there's not a lot of hay to be made on this file now that cannabis is legal, from their perspective. So I think it would be amazing if we could demonstrate to our elected officials that things like tourism and driving tourism are important to the public. Job creation is critical to the public. That they want to see a more functional system that accommodates their use, and that we would see better adoption of the legal system, especially in British Columbia, where we're holding it like 60% or something adoption of the market. That's a big chunk. 40% of British Columbians are still choosing to use the unregulated market. So I mean, by demonstrating to our elected officials that if they did make significant changes to the mandates that they are currently pursuing, and that those would be popular with the public, I think we might be able to make some hay with that.
And I'll just add to that statement there, Jaclynn. I don't know how BC calculates the usage of illicit versus legal cannabis, but on the federal level, when they put out their data, it's through surveys. And so that means that the number you're getting is the number of adults, the percentage of adults that are comfortable telling the government that they do illegal things. So on the federal level, it's you can be guaranteed that it's actually a way bigger percentage. I don't know how BC goes about getting their data, if it's also a survey, but if it is a survey, then take that 40% with a grain of salt and assume it's a lot bigger.
Well, I mean, I think that we can tell based on the continuing, I think, sympathy and support that the public offer to the unregulated space is a really strong indicator that that's the other fine line that we walk here, right? From an optics perspective, is that it is a very challenging thing to have a conversation about the unregulated market. How do we talk about enforcement of regulations? Like all of those kinds of things play into this in a really meaningful way. I've always tried to pivot away from those things towards tools, tools to be competitive and create space and create reasons for the consumer to choose us. But I mean, from the government's perspective, like one of the main policy pillars of legalization was the elimination of the unregulated market. Like that's what their stated objective was.
Yeah.
So I think that like demonstrating to the government that if they were to make changes, the public would then follow suit in a very meaningful way is a constructive kind of way that we could encourage our elected officials to think about this differently.
Whoever BD is, I don't know who you are. They say that BC's data does come from Statistics Canada, and Statistics Canada is the organization that does these surveys. So it's probably bigger than 40%. And also just give a shout out to Sophie Mass, who said that BC did put together a cross-ministry initiative to develop the cannabis framework, but she's not sure if now that it's legalized, government will see it as priority. And yeah, Jaclynn, on the same page there. I mean, if you want to eradicate the illegal market, the way to do that is by making the legal one actually accessible and viable. If people can thrive, then they will transition. And the funny thing is that the people who are in the illicit market are the people who fought for decades to legalize cannabis. And now that it's here, it's just the policies don't make any sense for small scale farmers. And this industry is majority small scale operators on both the retail side, on the production side, on the processing side. And so the only way in which you'll have a healthy and vibrant sector that has all the historic knowledge of doing this for decades is by making it so it's actually accessible for these people. And so in that way, like the goals are fully aligned. It creates something viable. In the long run, there'll be a lot more money in it because, yes, let's say it goes from 15% down to 5% or even 3%. Well, if you have a tenfold increase in the number of people that participate now, well, then you've made more money overall. Not to mention all the ancillary additional benefit, the sales tax, the employment tax, the property tax, et cetera, et cetera. And then likewise, you then get to eradicate the illicit market that the BC government seems to want to do. Bruce, I want to turn it over to you because I cut you off earlier when you started to mention the world illegal and something we hadn't talked about yet. Did we cover what you want to talk about, or is there something else that we're not thinking about?
There's two things. You've mentioned the actual economic value of squeezing out the illegal market. But there's also maybe I'm sounding like the apologist for the poor BC liquor distribution branch, but they don't have control over enforcement. So like if you were to get a cross-ministry initiative, you'd want the enforcement people at the table too, right? Because I think you need sort of two things here. You need the carrot, which is, hey, let's have a really high quality system that's delivering great product, great variety, and let's make it really hard to be illegal, right? We need both for you guys to be really successful. So, like if a cross-ministry initiative did percolate, you'd want to bring the enforcement guys to the table as well, right? Because that might actually help you accelerate the shift.
Yeah, I'll say we talked to the CSU, the Community Safety Unit, the folks who are responsible for enforcement on the unregulated side regularly. Like we have a quarterly standing meeting with them. And I think that, they're very frustrated as well. I think with the mandate that they've been handed, I think that they feel that it's a very ineffectual kind of framework, and that it isn't really, they're really spinning their wheels in a lot of ways, which, I mean, regardless of whether or not you're empathetic or, sympathetic or you agree with an enforcement agenda, I think that that's very telling. You know what I mean? That there doesn't seem to be a ton that we can do given our current framework. And I think that, that's part of the reason that we've been really focused on tools to compete, because I think that that's fundamentally the long and the short of it. My retailers, the people who use the unregulated market are their prospective customers. right? Like we want them in the system using the legal market, and they're not overly supportive of things like, you know, enforcement, et cetera, et cetera. So we've been, you know, trying to focus on wins, because if, enforcement was really an effective kind of policy, we wouldn't be having this chat. But I think that's what's fun. I always say this, like I grew up in Maple Ridge in the 90s. Like if enforcement worked, we'd be sitting here having a conversation, what's a cannabis, right? Like we wouldn't even be talking about it. But my point is, like my point about around enforcement is like that's, you know, that's an expenditure of public resources when this should be a file that is generating money. So when we first started this conversation, I kind of came out with the idea that there was a lot of underlying concerns that we need to address, and that the 15% wholesale markup is really a symptom of those things, because I believe wholeheartedly that, you know, if we had 100% market capture for the public in this province, it would be a very different proposition for these businesses that are currently struggling, right? We're talking about downward margin pressures that are, you know, like pretty much insurmountable for anybody that's in an unregulated framework, right? You don't have the same flexibility as somebody who's unregulated, right? So the point, to my mind, is to increase the flexibility, and the way I think we should do that is, I'm going to be real with you guys, I think a fundamental overhaul of the way that cultivation of cannabis is regulated in this country is absolutely necessary. I actually don't take much issue with the processing requirements. I think that, you know, if you're creating processed shelf stable products, the, you know, framework that they've created is actually a relatively reasonable one to protect public health and safety, the edible dosage limit notwithstanding. But I mean, if we started treating the cultivation of cannabis like what it actually is, which is an agricultural activity, and we gave farmers access to farm grants and taxation structures under the Farm Act, etc. Like, why in the hell, excuse my language, are these people who are growing a plant in the ground, you know, being regulated that like we're, you know, it's plutonium or something?
Lab.
Right? I know that's old school, and like I said, I take issue with that, because I don't believe that it is, you know, a policy that is evidence-based. I think that we can go back to kind of a stigma-based scenario, but I think that those kind of underlying issues are something that we really need to draw attention of our elected officials to, because what should be
wait, Jaclynn, I'm just gonna stop you there for a moment, because I fully agree with everything you're sharing. And that is a federal thing. So if you bring that up to any kind of BC provincial elected, they'll just be like, "Oh, it's not our mandate. It belongs to this other thing." So how does that tie into this the direct delivery situation that we're in? And
that is absolutely bogus. That is a total cop out on the part of our elected officials. If this was any other sector, any other resource sector that was critical to the economic health of this province, they would be in Ottawa knocking the door down, right? Like if you're trying to tell me that if this was like oil, if it was like natural gas, or if it was, you know, forestry or what have you, our premier would not be in Ottawa saying we have a serious problem with the way that this is being regulated and we need significant changes. That is the job of our province. You know what I mean? Like
it comes back to stigma then, that they don't want to take that step because of the negative perception that they think that they will receive.
I can't make windows into men's souls, but I could ask Bruce and Kelly what they think.
I'd like to weigh in here for a minute, because we are actually, I mean, I'm very optimistic. I have to say, I think we're headed in that direction. I think that cannabis, you know, I mean, years ago, I don't want to date myself, but you had to like in Ontario, you had to fill out a little piece of paper to order your alcohol when I was growing up, you know, and it was hidden behind in the back room. So I think we are headed in the right direction. And I will say that Craft Cannabis of BC is holding a regenerative cannabis workshop next month, and it's being funded by the Ministry of Agriculture. So,
amazing.
You know, like this is, things are happening. We are, you know, it's a process, and I know people are getting so frustrated, and I really feel for them, and I mean, we are working so hard. Sometimes some of us in the background, some of us, you know, Sami, I really appreciate what you're doing here for bringing us all together. But I am an optimist. I've always been an optimist, and you know, Canada is the first G7 to legalize. Like, and the work that we're doing right now is going to be really important. I watch a lot of what's going on in California. Hopefully some of the California tourism people will be coming up for the UBCM to speak with our leaders, not just municipal, provincial, and we're hoping that maybe Premier might attend. He's promised to do it in the past. So you know, like this is work, friends, and let's do it.
Yeah, so there, I agree that there's the cop out to say that it's a federal problem. However, you can also get creative at a provincial level too, right? Because the province has a tax structure, and you know, they could always do a fully refundable tax credit, right? So, you know, and again, you couldn't do it where it's in its like where it's sitting right now. That would be a finance issue. That's why if you could get a cross ministry initiative, the beauty about something like a refundable tax credit is it can be short term, right? You could do a refundable tax credit. You see, gee, we've got our share of the market up to 85%, because let's face it, no matter what, there's always going to be some illegal market, right? But at 85%, man, we're doing great. And then you can revoke the refundable tax credit, because effectively what you've done is you've pushed some of the illegal market out of the market. There's a cost to get back into it, you know, so, and people tend to buy who they bought from before. So if you can change that buy pattern so that it's, you know, the majority of people are buying from legal source, why am I going to go around looking for somebody when I can just go down the street and get what I want, right? Mm-hmm. So I think there could be quite a lot of flexibility if you get the right people at the table to create some, you know, even if it's a transitionary committee, transitionary policies, because no government likes to drop taxes, right? Mm-hmm. But if you you've got something like a refundable tax credit, that's something you can wipe out pretty quick, right?
Bruce, how do we counter the idea? Like, part of the problem that I've run into when I've had these conversations about things like refundable tax credits or farm grants or, you know, interest-free loans to support like any kind of sector capacity building from government. There's this, like, it seems to, or I mean, I don't know if this has changed dramatically because I haven't had that conversation since like early 2021. So this may have changed in that time, but there does seem to be this like misconception that cannabis businesses are extremely like rich and well financed because of the narrative around our I would have to choose my words carefully here. Our prominent publicly traded entities that have dominated the media space in this sector. So those, you know, how do we like really effectively disavow our elected officials of this misconception? Because like as Sami pointed out, like we're getting to a point where we're starting to see inventory. People are closing up shop. They're selling, you know, the facilities that they spent millions of dollars on. My retailers are facing, you know, the like lease renewals, et cetera. They have to make a decision if they want to get in or out. How do we effectively, you know, demonstrate that to government so we can back it up, as it were, and change their mind that a bunch of rich guys just rolling around?
Yeah.
Well, Jaclynn, there's actually a beautiful model here in BC, which is the craft beer industry.
Yeah.
Right? They've been really successful. In fact, I talked to Sami before. There's a little known group. There's actually an alternate distribution channel for craft beer here in the province. Mm-hmm. They set up their own distribution channel, and so they have their own trucks. They pick up from the craft producers. They consolidate and ship out. And so, you know, the great thing is there's kind of a precedent already set in British Columbia that you might actually be able to set up a parallel channel. Mm-hmm. So I would talk to the craft beer people because they've done a fantastic job. I mean,
No,
basically,
they were actually my inspiration for Direct Supply when we did our original white paper on
Yeah.
Direct Supply with the craft beer
Yeah.
people that we were cribbing from. And the thing is, the other thing that I find interesting is that sector has been held up as this like economic miracle in
Yeah.
BC, like incredible economic driver, and they employ about 2,400 people. The retailers alone, not including cultivators or processing, were around 3,500 frontline staff.
Mhm.
So, you know what I mean? Like, and that's something I think we like. I would also like to hear yours and Kelly's thoughts on like how we can really push that jobs narrative.
So can I just say for the UBCM, we're actually going to replicate that ale trail map that they have in a lot of their marketing materials. And we're going to create, I call it the hippie highway, but not everybody does, so there's other names for, but like planting the seeds of a vision that politicians and the economic folks, the accountants can then visualize, oh, I get it. That's where we're going to go next year for our seasonal tour
Right.
in the fall.
There was a comment come up in chat by Sophie here that says, talk about shifting the files to economic development. And I mean, really,
Yeah.
that would be great, right?
Well,
And the interesting thing, particularly with economic development, is they'll shift. Like they'll go, okay, well, for a few years, we're going to concentrate on building this industry. And then we get that industry stable. And then we're going to shift over here. So, I think Sophie's, recommendation, like, and maybe it starts with a cross ministry, or maybe on that advisory committee, the guys from the economic development ministry sit in on it and say, yeah, but we could actually have a heck of a lot more people employed, and here's all the multiplier values that are associated with it, right?
So I'm gonna pause this conversation here because I totally agree with what Sophie's sharing and what you're talking about, Bruce. But these are like kind of longer term things, and we really want to focus on this specific program that's on the cusp that has the potential to radically empower the small scale crafts sector here in BC to thrive. And so I want to just bring our focus back to there. And Bruce, I have a question for you, because you've done a lot of what you have called fee setting in the past. And one big issue that a lot of people in the sector have with the proposed implementation, of which we still don't have any details, even though it's been a year and a bit, that the BCLDB wants to keep their 15% proprietary fee, I think is what they call it. They won't call it a markup, even though that's what it is. Say it again, Jaclynn?
It's a tax.
Yeah, well, if they called it a tax, then that would be that would be an illegal thing, because the Cannabis Act limits taxation on cannabis to the $1 from the excise tax, which is distributed to both province and federal. So if they called it a tax, they'd be breaking the law. So
that's right. I'm just being cheeky. We know it's a fee. It's fine. Yes.
Well, I mean, but they wouldn't be so careful about calling it always. I think it's proprietary. They're very, anytime anybody calls it something different, they're like, no. It's called this thing. And they wouldn't be that deliberate about it if they weren't concerned about what we're talking about here. I think. I could be wrong, but that's what I think.
Right.
And sorry, before I get to you, Bruce. So right now they're charging 15%. And I would say doing arguably a bad job, in the sense that cannabis is a perishable good and it is not refrigerated. So you have Health Canada forcing all of these producers to jump through all these hoops to make sure that there's no microbial life, and then it's stored as a perishable good in a just room temperature, which means now, like, a majority of what's actually eventually making it to retailers is no longer going to be safe for human consumption in accordance with the Health Canada regulations, which is that's its own thing. I'm not going to get into that. The issue with the proposal is that they want to keep that same 15% fee, even though they're no longer doing any of the work. They're not doing the shipping. They're not doing the warehousing. They're not doing the distribution. All of these costs that they previously had, which presumably that 15% went towards, is now being offloaded to the actual independent producers and retailers. And so you're telling them, hey, we're going to make you do all the work, and we're going to charge you the same exact tax, the same exact fee, whatever you want to call it. At this point, it becomes a tax, because they're not doing any work. So they can't really call it a fee to services that they're doing. If it was like 0.5%, that would make sense for like the cost of servers and like, you know, the actual listing of here, we have one person that's going to deal with just listing everything. So Bruce, you've brought this up in our conversations in the past, but there's protocols and procedures to fee setting. I know nothing about that world. I would love to hear generally. Teach us about fee setting.
So the whole fee setting world shifted a number of decades ago with a Supreme Court decision in Ontario called the Uric case, where a guy was contesting the same thing that you're doing, that he had a large estate, he was doing probate, and the Ontario government had a flat fee. And he said, it doesn't matter whether you've got a $1 million or a $10 million estate, effectively it's a fixed cost. And so he actually went to the Supreme Court of Ontario, fought the case, and won. So what happened was really quite good, because governments right across Canada, and particularly the federal government, responded very quickly and established tools for fee setting, okay, and guidelines. And so most governments, I won't say all of them, but most of them actually went through and went, okay, this is a tax and this is a fee. And if we're going to do a fee, there's actually a kind of a prescribed way of calculating the fees based on what you basically said, Sami. What are we doing? How much does it cost to do it? And should we make a profit on it? Because believe it or not, there are some circumstances where governments charge fees and make a profit. Or is this, purely the regulatory, and we should just be what they call full cost recovery? So if I was arguing this case, I would say this is a full cost recovery, but that's it. They shouldn't be making profit on it. Or if they are, maybe a marginal one. And so if someone had deep pockets and was in this direct delivery, I think they probably got a hell of a case to go and challenge the government. And, the government just may say, once they see somebody challenging it, they may say, yeah, okay, it's easier to deal with it and fix it rather than actually fight a legal battle over it. But yeah, if they're not doing work for it and it's kind of a flat thing, it's certainly looking more like a tax than it is a fee, right? And I did actually ask the finance ministry for their documentation on the fee setting guidelines for the provincial government, and I have got a massive amount of runaround. I still don't have an answer after several months. Right?
Bruce, can I ask you a question? How long did that court case take?
Oh, geez, I don't know. Because it literally is decades old. I could go look it up for you, Kelly, but it was, this sort of framework has been in place for 30 years. And I don't know how long it actually took them to actually win the case.
Yeah.
So, Bruce, question for you. So I assume that the Ministry of Finance, they are obligated to tell a constituent about these procedures. These are public procedures.
I don't know if you just read the newspaper headline stuff about how the BC government's one of the worst governments in actually responding on information requests. I'm actually probably going to end up having to file a formal legal freedom of information request with them to get the information.
Have fun with those. The FOIAs are also like, they'll 9 months, they'll be like, oh, actually, but go ahead, Bruce, do it.
Yeah, Jaclynn, it's funny because as a consultant, I've actually worked on both sides. Like I actually set up the freedom of information processes for some of the ministries in Alberta. And so because we were trying to get the service time down, like we figured out a way to actually get those processed faster. But yeah, it's I understand frustration level because I've worked on both sides of it.
I think we've started charging for them now. Haven't we? Was it $25?
Yeah,
they can pay $25 a pop now. Super, super transparent, everybody. So Bruce,
money.
What I was going to ask you about fee setting is when you're looking for the provincial regulations and like legislation around that, like, is that guided by the federal framework? How does that, like, how does it, or is BC beholden to?
Okay, so hey, that's a great question. They technically don't have to do it, right?
Yeah.
The feds were really quite good. They came out through the finance secretariat and actually published a set of guidelines for all ministries to use. A bunch of the provinces simply cloned them and followed that process.
Mm.
BC, I don't think so. Like I've done fee setting at a municipal level, but I haven't set fees for the BC government. I have with the feds and other provinces. So I don't know if they follow the URIG guideline. I would suspect anyone who is, kind of good at it would probably, but I don't even know that I did find out that every ministry and every fee has to be set and submitted to finance to be reviewed and approved.
Mm-hmm.
But when I talked to finance about, how did they do it? Like their approval? Oh, well, that's confidential.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, that's crap. That can't be confidential. Fees have to be transparent. So I will probably have to end up doing a freedom of information request to figure out how they review the fees.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So what would the process that you'd recommend then, Bruce, if let's say we wanted to address, because that is a prohibitively expensive fee, when in addition to the fee, now you're also assuming all these costs that were previously paid for by the exact same fee using a different distribution channel. So is the process first go through this Freedom of Information Act to get that information first on how fees are actually set, what the policies are around that, and then once you have that, determine does it actually meet the requirement? If it doesn't, then either make a big public stink about it and or have a lawsuit. Is that kind of how you see this?
Why not? Because I mean, even though there is a time delay on it, the fact that if people start asking for how those fees are set, it's going to become public. People are going to be, they're going to be aware internally that maybe we don't have justified fees. And I mean, let's face it, they don't want to have to get dragged into court. They don't want to have to, deal with additional work. So, I mean, it may be easier for them to just, I hate to say it, roll over and say, okay, well, look at this fee. It's too crazy high. Let's change it.
Especially when it's very clear, like there's no way that if 15% is what you need to cover a whole bunch of costs, and then you're getting rid of 99% of those costs, like it's no longer reasonable. Like, and that's a very clear thing, and I have a hard time imagining any jury not seeing that very clearly.
Yeah, except Sami, there are some fixed costs of the operation, right? So there's they've invested in warehousing space, whether it's good or not. Doesn't matter, right? They've invested in warehousing space.
That wouldn't touch, because direct delivery, the whole point is now you can a producer delivers directly to a retailer and they don't touch it physically at all. There's no
right. Okay.
They're no longer distributing.
Okay, so but we still have the registration of the producer, right? We have the regulatory compliance piece that needs to be done. But I agree with you. It's probably way too high. Yeah.
Well, and the fact that we have to do, like, this is, I think, very interesting. Like, it's very kind of like telling, and part of the reason I think that we see frustration and distrust on the part of our stakeholders in the sector is that, like, why is it that I need an FOIA to figure out how you're setting these fees? Like, if they are being done in a reasonable and, fiscally, like, reflective manner, that should be something that you'd be eager to share with me as a constituent, as a stakeholder of the sector, to my mind, at least. And I think that's really, like, that it does, like, the consideration of how these things undermine the relationship that our regulator and our distributor have with the stakeholders is a really, like, big part of this. Because I'm listening to Bruce talk about, like, how, he's trying to figure out the like basic math of how we do these things, and it's just like, nah, we're not going to tell you.
And to give you some context on this, like Bruce and I connected maybe 4 months ago or so, and he started learning about CertiCraft, what we're doing in our business, and I was sharing kind of the challenges in our industry. And right away, he was like, "You know what, Sammy? Like, I'm retired now, but I've done like a lot of things in different industries on different government levels. Why don't I like fee setting is a thing that I'm very comfortable with. Let me go reach out to my contacts to the BC government, see what I can find." And that was 4 months ago. So it's been 4 months of him just trying to get like basic information on, hey, government, Department of Finance, how do you set your fees?
Sammy, the first response I got was after 8 weeks after I said, "How come you haven't even answered my email?" And somebody came back to me and said, "Oh, I thought we'd answered this." And hadn't even had an acknowledgement. So yeah, it was brutal. Like, I'm still in the cycle of trying to get someone who will say, "Yeah, I'm responsible for setting fees or reviewing fees." I still haven't been able to find the right person.
And it's sorry, go ahead, Kelly.
Well, there's advantages to living in Victoria as at the legislature. So I just want to say that maybe I can help. I don't know. I don't know.
Well, Kelly, that's a great idea. My wife's going down for the 55 plus games, you know, and I'm going along as her support crew. Maybe I should just wander into the ministry and keep banging on doors and somebody talks to me.
I had a license holder sit in Minister Farnworth, rather. I always want to pluralize it because of what's her face, because of Futurama. But literally sit in his lobby for I think 8 hours, just like, we're not going to leave until somebody sees us. We are not going to move until somebody talks to us. And they ended up speaking with the ministerial staff, and their issue was resolved. So I'm all for this. I'll buy you guys lunch if you go hang out.
We call it creative loitering. But it's like there are conversations that can be had on less. There are conversations for sure.
So guys, we have about 7 minutes till Kelly has to leave. So I just kind of want to do a quick kind of summary of what we talked about. I've taken notes throughout this conversation. I want to suggest a game plan with the three of you guys, see if you're open to it. Because again, the goal here is to make it really easy for our craft cannabis sector to be able to take action to actually initiate change. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of go through the list of what we have chatted about here. And what I'd like to propose is that maybe the four of us have another conversation, maybe asynchronous by email, maybe we just like meet for another half hour, and we try to like figure out how do we turn this list into actual actions that we can undertake. And then over the next few weeks, Jaclynn, you and I are very heavily involved in advocacy for our sector. Maybe you and I can kind of spearhead a campaign to kind of get the stuff out there. So first question.
Oh, sorry. Before you do that, there was the lady who came up with the really good information on the cross ministry initiative, Sophie.
Sophie.
I don't know if she's willing to join in, but like if she's got some history on that cross ministry.
Oh yeah, so Sophie's been a guest before. I'm sure she's one of the founders of the BC Craft Farmers
Co-op. You could bring her to the table with that as well too. I mean, I wrote some really specific notes in preparation of this on like how to position your industry to the liquor distribution board, like it's the core technical stuff, but yeah, sure, let's do that.
So Kelly, Jaclynn, Bruce, if we got Sophie on board as well, would you guys be down to do another half hour, like not on air, but just kind of figuring out internally what we think, how we can put this together? Okay, that's great. I'll follow up with you guys by email, and then I'll just kind of read through what we talked about. So we talked about potential actions, create a panel that talks to the Ministry of Finance, like the BTAP thing that Bruce brought up that the liquor side does, writing letters to our municipality, your MLA, to the Department of Finance, talking to the lobby business, what was the BCBC, I think, British Columbia Business Council. that Bruce brought up. He thought that they might be open to working with us. The tourism angle, Tourism Kelowna has embraced cannabis in a way that most other tourism boards haven't. They have a study, a report they've done on the profile of cannabis tourists that really addresses a lot of the stigma and false information that other tourism boards seem to have. So using that data to then reach out to Tourism BC and other tourism boards across the province, creating a cross-ministry initiative, getting enforcement, finance, agriculture, tourism, state on board. Public data, paying to have a survey of people to get their opinions on the craft cannabis industry, showing that they actually care about job creation, they care about tourism. Having that, assuming that the data shows that it is actually in our favor, would be helpful. Chatting with the craft beer industry, and actually, they're one of the next guests that I do want to have on the show. There's a Craft Cannabis Beer Association that almost all the craft beer producers in BC are part of, and definitely I'm really curious to have both them and the equivalent in the wine world as guests, kind of just understand their history on a future State of Craft. Anyway. Talking to them about their direct supply and the comparisons that Jaclynn brought up on the jobs that exist. And last but not least, fee setting, getting this Freedom of Information Act on the BC's Ministry of Finance to actually have them disclose their fees, which is a public policy, so it should not be confidential. And then once that's in place, to then either raise a public stink or open a lawsuit. That's kind of the notes that I've taken, and we talked about a lot, guys. There's lots in here. So I look forward to connecting with you guys and seeing what is realistic that we think we can really push forward that's going to make the biggest impact. Because I think having like all these different things is going to be too much to try to get everybody to do. But if we could like pick 2 or 3 that seem like the highest value, that we're having like hundreds of people in the industry across BC, maybe even thousands if we can play our cards right, all lend their voices together in unison. I think that can make a really big difference. Yep. One last shout out I'll give Livona from the BC LDB. I'm happy that you've been here. I'm happy you've got to witness this conversation. Very much would love it if you shared your take on what you heard here today with the rest of your organization. We this video will go up on YouTube on Monday, I believe, is usually when we put up things on YouTube. So thank you very much for being here. If you have anything you want to share with us, the chat is there. Don't want to put pressure on you though. If you don't feel uncomfortable with that, that's totally fine too. Kelly, you're about to leave. Any final words you want to share with our audience?
Oh gosh, I wasn't thinking of that, but
you can also say no. You can say no. That's okay.
Yeah. I hope that some of the people that are in this room right now will join us at the UBCM, and I want to encourage you to get in touch with the good folks at Craft Cannabis, because this year, we've just gone through COVID. I understand that the government got very distracted during COVID, and I have a lot of friends that work in government. I mean, it's been a tough few years for all of us on many different levels, but I am very optimistic for the future, and yeah, so I'm thinking of you all out there. Thank you, Sami. Thanks, you, Jaclynn. Kelly. Nice to meet you, Bruce.
And apologies,
bye, everyone.
Apologies to BD who had a question specifically for Kelly. We're not going to ask that right now. We're going to stick to.
I'll be happy to talk to them if you want to. Yeah.
Oh, if you want to just leave your email in the chat, Kelly, and then somebody can follow up with you.
Oh, sure. I'll do that right now.
Okay. Bruce and Jaclynn, do you guys have any final thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thanks. It's kind of fun to be invited into a new industry and bring some expertise from other areas. So it's fun. Yeah, I'm looking forward to working with you guys and seeing what I can do from bugging the government from my knowledge base.
Cool.
So thanks for the invite.
You're most welcome. Thanks for accepting it and coming here despite not having much experience in the sector.
I look forward to harassing our elected officials with you, Bruce. Constructively.
Yes, of course.
Thanks, Sami. Thank you so much for having us and for having this conversation. This is amazing. My association is actually moving forward with a letter writing campaign.
Wait. I'm gonna get.
Oh.
I want to end on that note. Note.
Oh.
Because there's still two questions that people have asked. There's two questions I want to answer them first, and I want to end on that note. So those of you who might be thinking about leaving because it feels like it's the end, wait, because Jaclyn's got an announcement.
I've got
It's an important one.
Sure. Spoiler alert.
Okay, so BD asks, does the BC NDP think the cannabis industry has nowhere to turn? Is anyone lobbying the BC Liberals? That might have been a good question for Kelly because she's very much involved in Victoria and has kind of a sense of that. Bruce, Jaclynn, do either of you guys feel like you can speak to that at all? I don't think I can.
I can speak to that, yeah. So I have been very paying a lot of attention to the leadership race. So we had some, interesting conversations with some of the candidates for the BC leadership race, specifically Gavin Dew, who was really interested in, cannabis as a sector that was emerging that would appeal to young folks. Obviously, he was not the successful candidate. We had Kevin Falcon.
I'm sorry, I'm totally out of the political loop. Which party are these two names?
BC Liberals. So the BC Liberals answering this question. So,
okay.
Identifying that, perhaps our opposition might be a great tool to start to encourage the sitting government to think differently about the cannabis file. We, really focused on the leadership race that was happening. So the BC Liberals were holding a race to determine who their leader was going to be. And one of those candidates was a gentleman named Gavin Dew, who was very, very interested in the cannabis sector. He's a young man, family, and his leadership platform was childcare, cannabis, and climate change. So those were the three pillars that he had brought forward. So, obviously he was not successful. Kevin Falcon is now our leader of the opposition. And we do have, an open conversation with the opposition party, but we're still, the struggle is stigma, right? I think that from a political perspective, as I said before, I think that there is a perception that the public cared about the legalization of cannabis. And now that is, kind of passed, there is no real hook from a political perspective on the cannabis file. So I don't think that our opposition has taken advantage of a lot of the opportunities that the cannabis file has presented them to potentially be critical of our government and the way that they've handled this file. But I have hope that will change. I agree with Kelly. I think that it is an inevitability that stigma will dissipate. And as that happens, as we start to be recognized as businesses and job creators and all those other things, then hopefully some of the hurdles that we face in terms of being taken seriously, because, like I said, Bruce, you were joking about, do they think you're dirty stoner hippies? Yes, the answer is yes.
and more than that, they think that either there's a criminal element that you are diverting. There's always this assumption that you're trying to break the law. That exists. And yeah, there's that's a big part of where I think a lot of the challenges we're facing from services from government come from. That there's this underlying kind of assumption there that's been shown by the Department of Justice Canada that that's not true at all. They did a study actually in 2011 that showed that less than 5% of unlicensed illicit cannabis producers actually are involved with organized crime in any kind of way. The majority are community focused and are a big part of their community and their economy, which is not the result I think the Department of Justice was expecting when they did that study.
Yeah, there's so many misconceptions, and that's something that we fight against, because if you're a politician, you know what I mean, looking at protecting a center right or a right flank of constituents who might be business friendly, traditionally, but might not be so friendly on the drug file, if we want to just put it bluntly. I could give you an hour of very spicy takes about the political landscape in British Columbia right now related to the sector, but I will refrain. But I will say that has been a challenge, is again that stigma, the idea that people who would traditionally be supportive of low government intervention and business might not necessarily align with the social considerations around the legalization of cannabis, right? And unfortunately, unless we're seen as, you know, what do politicians care about? They care about votes and money. That's it. So we have to do, that's another thing I think from our sector's perspective, is that we have to demonstrate that we represent an active and engaged voting bloc, and that we will, you know, throw our weight around if given the opportunity. And I will end my comments here, Sami, in terms of opportunity, as Kelly said, you know, COVID was something that nobody had ever had to deal with that before, whatever, like that the government was, you know, the gummed up works. This is our opportunity, as that crisis has been ignored or dropped or subsided, whatever you guys, however you perceive COVID and its, you know, our movement forward through that. That means that government's attention is going to turn to other things that are more traditionally, they're supposed to be their focus now. And it's our opportunity to take advantage of that and seize that opportunity and put this in front of our elected officials and say, hey, pay attention to this, especially in the run up to the next election cycle, which we're only 18 months out of now. Right.
Awesome.
Like, and that's when we become the most powerful, I think, as a block of stakeholders.
I appreciate that perspective, Jaclynn. We have one last question, which is from Corey. Corey asks, Bruce, does the BC LDB have an obligation to release their retail store financials through a Freedom of Information request?
Oh, hey, that's a really good question. So depends on what level of detail. I don't know if any of you have actually looked at their financial statements. There is a breakdown that they actually break down their gross retail sales. I think they might be able to successfully defend a request to not disclose an individual retail store, but you know, generally their financial. Like I scanned their financial report in preparation for this meeting, and I mean, their financials are actually pretty good and pretty informative. That's where I found out, you know, the fact that you guys aren't that big of a business, and also that you decreased their gross margins, right? So, I mean, the data that's already publicly available is reasonably detailed, but I think they could probably deny a breakdown for an individual store.
Is there anything that's not at the level of a store, but more detailed than what's in the reports that you saw, that would actually be helpful or useful in what we're trying to achieve?
I don't know. Like, they break down their, you know, they break down their wholesale sales, their sales through all their different distribution channels. I mean, it's actually a pretty good report.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's great to know.
Yeah.
Definitely will look that up at some point in the near future.
Yeah, no, you should. I mean, the critical documents that you guys all need to know is you do need to see go through their financials. There's also something called a service plan, which is how they're going to run their business. And that's got a ton of great information. And you should always read the mandate letters, because that gives you the playing field. With those 3 documents, you have a much better understanding of what they want to achieve, and so that you can write your lobbying plan or your actions to support them to make their goals. Because if you can, you know, like if you can get some goal alignment here and say, you know, we can help you get your goals if you help us do this. I mean, that's where you're going to get your wins. Right?
That's a good point, because that's kind of something that's been really frustrating for me. It's like, you know, in the long run, we have the same goals, but if I think about all my communications to the BCLDB, I don't think I've ever framed it in that kind of a way. And I feel like that might make a huge difference if everything is framed in the sense of, you know what, we're not talking short term here, we're talking long term. We are actually on the same page as far as what this program done effectively could.
Sami, I had an assignment with a ministry in Alberta that they had a quote at arm's length board, and they actually ended up hating one another, and they brought us in to do a joint strategy map for them. And by the end of the day, within 8 hours, they had already identified all the common shared goals and realized that they shouldn't hate one another. They should actually be working together, right? And I think you'll find that if you go through even just those 3 documents, and I suspect there might be a few more that I can dig up, and get a really good understanding of what they want to achieve, you can show them that, hey, here's our goals. This is what the industry wants to achieve. And this is how the industry is going to help you make your goals. Right.
I have one last question for you, Bruce, on that note. You sent me last night the mandate that was signed in,
Right.
I think it was April of 2021 for that fiscal year. Does that imply that there's a new mandate that was signed in the past month or two that we should be finding? Because it specified 2021, 2022.
Yeah, that was the last mandate I could find online. I hate to say it, compared to other provincial governments, navigating the BC government website to try to find documents is absolutely atrocious. So yeah, you should have the most current one. Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for being here. This has been an eye-opening conversation. I look forward to our follow-ups to kind of figure stuff out. Before I tell you what our next episode is going to be, which is going to be our last one we're going to take a break for the summer. We'll be back maybe late August, early September. We have one more State of Craft before we take a break from this episode after a year and a bit of doing it every 2 weeks, except when there's a holiday on Friday. Then we do it every 3 weeks. Before we do that, I want Jaclynn to share a project she's been working on that's very related to what we've been talking about here. And Jaclynn, I'd love you to have the floor and kind of talk about this initiative that you're taking.
For sure. So what we've done is we've got our government relations and advisory board together, and we've crafted a white paper related to the 15% wholesale markup that frames it as in the context of other jurisdictions wholesale markups. So for instance, like Saskatchewan, which is a direct supply, in apparatus, we took their I think it's 6% or something like that they charge for their government business. Same thing with the Ontario. And then essentially we're positing, we are the highest, wholesale markup in the country, or were until Alberta recently introduced something that's slightly higher than ours. Would it not make sense to, rationalize this wholesale markup to better align with the rest of the country? So that's the framing. And then the conversation is, why that would be beneficial to the sector and to stakeholders. So how, we're not expecting as retailers that cost savings would be passed on to us, but rather would benefit our cultivators and enable them to undertake the logistical considerations that come with having, to take orders and deliver and market, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a letter writing campaign that we're undertaking to all of our MLAs in British Columbia. We're going to be providing them with that ask in the white paper. I am more than happy to spread that love. So if anybody is interested in participating in that letter writing campaign, I am here to enable you to do so. You don't have to be a member of the association. We will just provide you with, the white paper and the approach. Something that I've been really trying to do is getting people to feel comfortable going to their MLAs, because what I hear from a lot of stakeholders is like, okay, I made the phone call, but what do I say to them? I'm mad. That's not going to help really, right? You know what I mean? So what we're trying to do is you can say you're mad, but also here are all the reasons and here are the solutions to why we are mad. So if anybody is interested in joining the association in pushing to their MLAs, an alarm bell that this is critical and something that needs to be addressed, we're more than happy to support, and we would love to have more voices. The more the merrier. And that's the kind of thing that I'm hoping that when we have our conversation with Bruce and Kelly and Sophie offline, that we can start to kind of craft initiatives like that are less retailer specific and more sector oriented. I think would be amazing.
That'd be great.
Yeah. And I know Jaclynn and I have been talking and about the creation of a smaller committee that has representatives from all the various policy advocacy organizations. I got an email from Jaclynn a week or two ago to kind of get the ball rolling on that. Maybe then we can kind of start looking at what the liquor side is doing and mimic that with the creation of this. If there's something that we'd have to do somewhat differently in order to be like that standing panel, I forget what the label that you used is, Bruce. Maybe that can be taken into consideration now, just to have that much more. I don't know what the right lingo is here. I just don't. I'm not somebody who understands government and how they operate, but I feel like it's worth looking into what they do and understanding them better.
And we want to bring the provincial working group, to the federal level as well, because something I've been doing is talking to the folks in Quebec. Quebec is one of those rare instances where they have a parallel history and issue on this file that BC does. They uniquely understand the challenges of a very, very thriving unregulated market. And so their LP association, because they only have publicly owned private retail, their Licensed Producers Association is really committed to like systemic change at the Cannabis Act. So what we're hoping to do is bring everybody from across Canada together and bring, like 3 policy initiatives that we can execute on that are like, relatively high level that everybody, has agreement on. And hopefully that can be, a push at a federal level. Because I do think people are starting to, like, our elected officials are starting to stick their heads up and notice. Yeah. That's something that, like, if anybody's taking anything away from this, I know that a lot of what we said isn't like the most hopeful stuff, but I can tell you that I have seen more interest on this file from elected officials in the last like 2 months than I have in the last 3 years in my role. So, I mean, that is to me very, very heartening. And I think that, we'll get organized and we'll make it happen. Because if we don't, I think that what we really need to make the elected officials aware of is that real people are going to lose their businesses. Like that, this isn't, and
then it's already happening. It's not a question. It's happening actively.
Exactly.
And it's only going to increase and increase and increase. And it doesn't need to. That's the thing. It doesn't need to.
And to me, that's the worst tragedy of that. And I will say this to everybody who's a license holder is that you guys, in good faith, were, helping the government with your time, effort, and money to further this policy initiative, right? Like that, we have a unique kind of role in the rollout of legalization of cannabis as license holders. And I think it's important for us to remind our elected officials, like we didn't have to do this. You know what I mean? Like nobody had to go and participate in the legal system. We did so in good faith. And now it is time for the government to show that good faith back to the sector to make sure that we're sustainable and reasonable. That is what I would say. So
that's a pretty reasonable ask, in my opinion. Thank you to all of you for being here today. Those of you in the audience, thanks, Curtis and Corey, for saying thanks. Appreciate that. Bruce, Jaclynn, thank you so much for being here. Kelly, if you are still listening as you prepare to go out, thank you for being here too. And if not, thank you anyway. It's been a pleasure. This is the State of Craft, hosted by CertiCraft. We're on a mission, like I said, to help craft cannabis producers transition into and thrive in this market. And it's hosted by CertiCraft. Oh, I just said our primary thing is a compliance platform to make it really easy to stay on top of all the regulations and requirements and policies that the CRA and Health Canada have. We support medical sales, processing, and cultivation. And next time, which will be the final State of Craft before we take a break for the summer, is going to be with Williams Lake First Nation, rather, not an S there. They're super interesting. They're unique in the Indigenous Canadian Indigenous world in that they have embraced the legal framework that the federal and provincial governments have done. They're not participating in the red market like a lot of other Indigenous nations are doing, but instead they've created a retail outlet, they've created a production outlet. Sugarcane cannabis is their production outlet, and we'll be having a conversation with their head horticulturist, it's Brendan, I forget his last name, with their operations person, Daniel Penny, as well as Chief Willie Sellers of First Nation. So it'll be a super interesting conversation to kind of understand their whole approach and kind of why they're doing what they're doing, and learning a bit about them and their story. And yeah, that'll be in 2 weeks on June 24th, and then we'll take a break for a month or two after that, and that'll be good for me to recharge, because this series is taxing. It's an energy drain. It's fun, but it takes work to do. and yeah, I'm feeling like I need a bit of a summer break. So I hope you guys are okay with having that little bit of a break for my own mental and emotional health here.
Thank you for everything you do, Sammy. Thank you for facilitating these conversations. They're so valuable.
Oh, you're welcome, Jaclynn. It's a pleasure. I mean, we want to see this industry thrive. Like we started our business because we saw people struggling with compliance and having a really hard time with that, and recognizing that there wasn't any software at the time that was good, that actually made sense to people. And so we started our business and to support that need. And then as we got deeper into it, there is a lot of alarming things in terms of how government at all levels were talking about policy and regulations. And so I got very involved on the policy advocacy side, and have done a lot of work that has actually created impact. It's been cool to kind of see certain things change, and I'm thankful for people like yourselves here who give me really great advice. Like Bruce, like I don't know if the budget would include cannabis if it wasn't for you telling me how important you think it was that there's this consultation. You need to take advantage of it, and having just enough time to have the Kootenay Cannabis Council get on board with drafting a letter, working together to create that, and then getting in less than 24 hours over 50 different producers across Canada to submit their variation on that letter. Like thank you for that suggestion. That was huge. And you're muted, Jaclyn. I see you're talking right now.
Sorry, that's incredible, Bruce. Thank you very much for for lending your expertise to the sector. That's just an incredible thing. So
yeah, here's to making real change. Here's to the BCLDB engaging more meaningfully and finding how we can align in a way that everybody feels like, okay, no, we can do this together. I mean, I think at the end of the day, to the BCLDB, because I see you guys are still here, what we really want is just to be taken seriously, treated respectfully, and to just really have an honest conversation and have you like legitimately listen to us, because it just doesn't feel like you care. And it really sucks when people are closing down their businesses because they can't distribute their goods. Hopefully we can find a way in which we can all talk, be at the same table, find where our needs align, and create a program that addresses the needs of the sector, which we don't get the sense that what you guys are implementing is going to do, while also it's at UCLDB. And I'm confident that we can find that somehow, but we need you to come to the table with open arms and not just have,
Sami, from reading their documents and hearing this discussion, you guys have got a ton of goal alignment. You just got to get it down on paper and have someone like Jaclynn carry it forward. And I think you guys have got a lot of common goals, and I think it's probably not going to be as big a hurdle as you think it is.
I certainly hope so. That would make me really happy.
And on that positive note, I think that's amazing. I agree, Bruce. I think that finding alignment is the key here, because we all want the same thing. We all want British Columbians to thrive and for the cannabis sector to be, an opportunity for everybody. So,
yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
It looks like Sami's having problems with technical sides, but that's a good time for me to leave as well. Thanks very much, everybody. I really enjoyed being here.
Bye, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you for this lovely conversation. Till next time, like and subscribe on YouTube if you're watching on YouTube. We'd appreciate that. Bye-bye.